What's up, y'all? I hope the lighting's okay because I'm actually recording a little later than I normally do in the afternoon, so here's hoping that looks good. So today's topic is something I saw asked for way back when I posted that how to make a foam base tips and trick video, and so I thought I'd finally get around to covering it, and that is how to fur the head. So in this video, because furring the head actually isn't a super hard process, I'm going to go over the actual process generally though, and then I'm going to give 3 tips to remember when you are furring your head. A disclaimer before I start, this is going to be for toony foam heads. I've never really furred a resin-based head before. I've never really worked with them a lot too. I'm sure that the technique is pretty similar and you can like transfer the skills, but these tips are specifically going to be in regards to foam heads and foam toony heads, to be more precise. So let us start with how to actually fur the head. I'm going to, obviously, as I do with all my videos, be talking about this from the, base level. So if you've furred a head before, you could probably skip this or, just listen and be like, yeah, that's what I do. Whatever you want to do. But if you've never furred a head base before, here's how you do it. Another disclaimer about this step-by-step, I know this differentiates between makers, but because of the eyes I do, I am going to be talking about this in regards to the fact that the eyes have already been inserted into the foam base. I fur my head with the eyes already inserted. I know there are some makers who don't do that. I know it's different if you have 2D eyes. So once again, this step-by-step is going to be in regards to a toony head with inserted eyes. I'll talk a little bit about what it means if you don't have 3D eyes or inserted eyes, but it's really not going to be too much different. Like I said, I'll go over it, but keep that in mind when you're listening to these tips. So before we actually get into the process, let's go over the materials you're going to need. You are obviously going to need duct tape. I would say that a roll should be fine. Sometimes you might need a roll and a half, but if you get the big like jumbo rolls, you should be good with just one. You're going to need a Sharpie. You will need something to cut with. I generally go back and forth between scissors and X-Acto knife, depending on what I'm cutting. You will be needing your fur, obviously. You will be needing whatever you use to shave the fur with. And sometimes you'll need newspaper tracing paper for patterning, and not always. I'll get into why you do or don't need that later on in these tips. But yeah, those are your basic supplies, and with that, we're ready to go. So let's begin the process. I'm gonna have some visuals here, so if you want to watch the video and see those, go for it. And again, I am going to be explaining this in a general way, but I'm also gonna be explaining this for, the first time beginner. So if you've furred a million heads before, make of it what you will. But you have it, here's what you do. So you have your foam base, it's all ready, it's all set. Your first step of the process is to take your duct tape and duct tape the entire foam base. Cover the whole thing. Cover the inside of the mouth too. Cover the ears. Cover the back. Do whatever. Make sure you do it on a head base, because if you're just kind of doing it where it's not on a head base, the back might cave in. You might not get the right measurements. It's just easier to do it on a base, just so the head shape stays precise. In regards to the eyes, if you have your eyes already inserted, all you're going to do is you're just going to tape around them, basically. If you don't have your eyes inserted, if you are a 2D eye maker, a lot of what I've seen people do is they make tiny holes in the head base for, where you're going to see out of, and they do the same thing. They just put the tape around that hole just so they don't cover the hole. So it's pretty similar in process. It just depends on what you want to do. Step 2, now that you have your base all taped up, you are going to take your Sharpie and you are going to first, I highly suggest doing this first, putting where you want the seams to go on your head. For instance, a few of my seams are at the muzzle. I do some in the back of the head, etc., etc. So I would mark where you want the seams of the fur to go, because there are going to be seams there. You can't just make the whole thing as one. After you have marked the seams, start marking the actual markings of the character. So for instance, my markings would be, my orange strip. And I mean, this character doesn't have a lot of unique markings, but the orange and white are obviously markings. So you will take your Sharpie and you will mark on your base where the markings are. If you are new to patterning bases, I suggest doing something along the lines of marking the markings in a different way, maybe like a dotted line instead of a solid line, or so like with a different color or something like that, just so you know where the markings are and where the seams are. Because at the end of the day, you are going to be cutting both. They're all going to be like cut, but sometimes it can get confusing. That's something I'll go into later. So depending on your skill level, just make sure that it's clear to you which is a seam and which is a marking. So now that you have your base all taped up, you're going to do exactly what you think. You're going to cut it all off. There's no set way to cut your pieces. I mean, cut big pieces first, cut small. I don't know. It really depends on however you want. You just cut them out. And this is where the newspaper/tracing paper comes into play if you want it. When they pull the pieces off their foam base, some people like to put the sticky side of the duct tape down onto paper so it doesn't stick when they're tracing it on the fur. Some people don't. Personally, I don't, because I just think it's an extra step of work, but I have friends who do it and it works for them. So it's really up to you. If you can deal with the stickiness, deal with it. If you want to be more precise, put it on paper. Step 4 is you now have your pattern pieces for your head. And there they all are. Aren't they beautiful? Wow, amazing. So now that you have all your pattern pieces, you're going to put them on the fur and you're going to cut them out and then you're going to sew them up. That was like 3 steps in one, but that's basically it. There you go. You now have your fur. You now have your head sock or whatever you want to call it when you have them all together. And basically at that point, you just go ahead and you start gluing or sewing or what have you. Yeah, that's basically it. That's how you fur the head from start to finish. Again, I tried to be as general as I could with this because this is not a tutorial video. This is a tips video, but I wanted to go over the general process before I talk about the tips so you have a little context when I'm referring to certain things. And now for the 3 tips to keep in mind when you are furring your head base or applique or whatever, I don't know. Number 1, I know this is probably the elephant in the room kind of question. Do you shave the fur before you put it on the head base, glue it on, whatever, or do you shave it after? The big answer for this, it is your call. I have seen both methods done by multiple people to varying degrees of success, so I can't actually say do this one versus this one or say I suggest this one more, because if I had to say what I think I see most, I want to say I see people shaving the fur after they put it on the head, but I am the outlier. I have tried that method and it did not work for me. Why didn't it work for me? Because of how I build my head bases, taking you back to that whole thing that everybody does it differently. There's no right way. So this is really a technique you are going to have to try for yourself and you're going to have to see how it works. Because if you built your head base a certain way, one technique might work for you and one might not. Again, shaving the fur on the head does not work for me because I find there are small parts of the head base that I can't get to when it's already stuck to the foam, and therefore my shaver can't get to it and scissors makes it all choppy. So bottom line, I shave my fur before I adhere it to the foam base. So bottom line, this is a technique that you have to try and you have to see what works for you. Tip number 2, remember early in this video where I said to make different markings for your seams and your markings? That's because tip number 2 is make sure to mark all the lines on your head base clearly. Why? Because if you don't, when you're cutting out the pieces off your head base and you're putting them down on paper, you might not realize what's what. I've had multiple instances where I personally have traced a fur piece from a pattern piece, and because I didn't mark an edge clearly enough, I didn't make it look like an edge, I made it look more just like a curve, I ended up sewing the wrong pieces together, or I ended up sewing the seam wrong, or something like that. So always make sure they're marked clearly. Always make sure you know what's an edge, what's a curve, what is a marking, what is supposed to be this, what's supposed to be that. You get the gist. It'll save you so much grief in the long run. And there are actually some makers who will go the extra mile and they will draw arrows all over their duct tape patterns before they cut it off, so this also ties into it, know which way the fur is going. It's another important thing. Make sure you are making the fur go the right way when you're putting the pieces down. But to do that, they will get really intricate with their details. They'll write little words on their bases, they'll write color names, they'll write arrows. So if you have to do that, go for it. It will help you. So that is something to keep in mind when you are putting out the markings on your duct tape. Last tip for this video. This is a tip that I'm going to give you basically as a tip. slash a technique. This is something you should keep in mind as a tip and not something you have to do, and that is doing a symmetrical pattern in your duct tape. What I mean by that is instead of taping over the entire face, you only tape half of it. Now, I only really suggest doing this technique if you've gotten to the point in your foam base making where you're making your foam base about 90-95% symmetrical on both sides, where the margin for error in asymmetry is like 5%, so it's like almost spot on. If you are at that point with your foam bases, you've been making enough foam bases that you've gotten to that level, then I would suggest doing this technique because it does save a lot of time. All it is, like I said, patterning half the face, so you only have duct tape for one side, and when you go to put it on the fur, it's the same on both sides. You just flip it to get the other side. This is a helpful technique because when you're putting it on your actual face, the overall result will make sure that the head looks similar. Now, I say this is a more advanced technique slash tip because this does require a little bit of messing with to get just right, to make sure both pieces fit exactly right. But in the long run, you will get a much more symmetrical looking fursuit head. Again though, this is a technique I only suggest doing if you're on that level. If you know your foam base is not symmetrical or you're having issues, do not push yourself to do that. Make sure you do the whole thing. This is just something that, again, after 10 years of making fursuits, I got to the point where I'm like, why am I taping up both sides of the head? I don't mean to sound cocky, but I'm just trying to let you know that really, if you're at that level, I know I've said this a million times, but if you're at that level, do it. If you don't, work up to that level. It'll be fun when you get there. Alright everyone, that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I was clear in everything. I just about finished up all my travel vlogs, and there's going to be a trailer for them too since there's multiple ones. So look for that in the coming weeks. I'm excited to share that with you. And before I go, I realized like a little while ago I hit 10K subscribers. Oh my god! You guys are so awesome. I never really thought my channel would ever like get this big. I can't believe there's 10,000 of you who like listening to me rant and talk about how to make a fursuit right or wrong. So thank you all so much again for that. I always told myself that if I ever made it to that point, I would make a paw tutorial. So for those of you who've been, watching my channel to learn how to make these, your time is coming. Of course, because it's an actual tutorial, and I've never actually filmed a tutorial before, so we're going to learn how to do that. It's going to take a while. I'm not going to say that it'll be out super soon, but I'm also not going to say that it's not coming out for like a month, because I'm going to try my best to get that out pretty soon as a thank you all. So if you're looking to make these, keep a lookout. So as always, thank you for watching. If you have anything you'd like me to talk about, comment below. And I will see y'all next time.